Screenless. Michael Carroll, young adult fantasy author, comic book writer, editor. Welcome to Creative Cuppa.
Thank you very much. It's lovely to be here.
You're very welcome. You're very welcome.
I like what you've done with the place.
Ah, that's very kind. So let's start with young adult fantasy novels. How did you become an author for that genre?
Well, that was one that I sort of slipped into. I've been writing short stories for a long time. I'd always wanted to write a novel. And it was a science fiction convention in 1991, I'm going to say. I met a writer, Michael Scott, Irish writer, very well known over here, very prolific. He was a guest at the con. We hit it off immediately. I said to him, I've always wanted to write a book. And he snapped, "Why don't you?" I went, "What?" And I thought, that's a bit rude. But then I realised he obviously gets told all the time, "I've always wanted to write a book." And there's no impediment to writing a novel, apart from one's own fear of actually doing the work. So I went, yeah, why don't I? We got chatting, and he mentioned that there was a few Irish publishers who published young adult science fiction, fantasy, that kind of thing. And I had a few ideas for stories. I'd had recently had a short story that I did quite well in a local competition, and I thought, if I could expand on that, it would make a good kids science fiction novel. And so that's what I did. I think it was like 35,000 words, and it took about 2.5 months to write, which is, to me, seems ridiculous. I can do that in a week now.
Wow.
I mean, I shouldn't because it would be rubbish, but I could.
Yeah.
But so basically, I sent it to one of the big publishers here, and they promptly didn't get back to me. And after, I know, a long time. It must have been 5 or 6 months. To me, it seemed like a long time then. No reaction, no response. I just said, okay, it doesn't matter. Send it to another publisher, so a new publisher that was just starting out. But in the meantime, while I kept writing, I started working on a second book. But I think about 4 days after the second publisher said, "Yes, this is great, we'll buy it," the other publisher got back to me and said, "We love your book, we want you to come in and talk to us." And I went, that's a bit awkward.
It's a nice position to be in, though.
So I said, "But I have this other book." So I got 2 books published at the same time, more or less.
Wow.
It came out in 93, which means that the intended readers of my books then would be 40 now.
Wow.
Because they would have been aimed around 12, 13-year-olds.
It's a theme that goes across all the creative industries, I think, which is, why don't you?
Yes, of course.
The way you got started was someone saying that to you. You can't wait for other people to give you permission to do things, can you? Just get started.
No, of course. Yeah, you have to seize the metaphor by the horns and just actually do it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's easy to do that when you don't have impediments such as children or a proper job or something. But we've been blessed with the patter of no little feet. But so I have a lot more time than a parent would. But when I was writing for the first few years, I certainly had a full-time job. I mean, I published the first 8 or 9 books, I think. My sense of time is very bad. There's now and there's before now. That's all I understand. But I wrote, after the young adult books took off and then ground to a halt very quickly, I started writing romance novels. Again, that was just one of the things I fell into because, I don't know if this might be of interest to your listeners, but what the hell, I'm going to say it anyway. I pitched a few ideas to one of my publishers after my 3rd book, I think. Pitched a few ideas, and every idea just fell flat. They went, "No, not interested." But I had this idea for an adult novel, which was set in a place similar to where I was living at the time, which is an old house that was chopped up into many, many little flatlets or bedsits. Every character would have a different story, and they would all interact and cross over. And it was incredibly complex. But I pitched them this idea, and they went, "Okay, we like this one character and her story. The rest we don't care about. Write a whole book about her, do it as a romance, and we'll publish under a female pseudonym." And I went, "Okay," because there would be money.
Yeah.
And so I ended up doing a whole bunch of those. They paid very well. But it was a hard slog. But then, of course, it's not meant to be easy. It's meant to be hard.
Well, exactly.
But I learned a huge amount. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and you don't learn anything by doing things the easy way.
Exactly.
You can only learn by doing things the hard way.
Yeah.
So yeah, I learned a huge amount about writing from that, and then gradually moved into the other kids' books. But again, Sense of Time is so poor.
Other kids' books. Quantum Prophecy is a series that you have written for young adults, which is published by Penguin Random House. What is that series all about?
Well, actually, first of all, it was published in the UK by HarperCollins, and then Penguin did the US version. But a series, it was my take on a superhero story. Because at the time, original superhero prose fiction was very thin on the ground. Nobody else was doing superhero stories in prose form, except for novelizations of movies or comics. And I thought, okay, so my basic idea was to have a world where there had been superheroes of the power level of Wonder Woman, Batman, Spider-Man, this kind of thing. But they all disappeared some time ago. And that was like 10 years after they disappeared, some younger people, kids who are 13, 14 years old, start finding that they're getting strange abilities because it turns out superpowers kick in at puberty. And one of the things we find out in the book is that one of the bad guys created this devastating weapon that was like an energy wave type thing, a lot of pseudoscience in there, that wiped out all of the other superheroes' powers, so they no longer had any abilities. And they had to go back to their normal lives. And the plan had been that this machine would keep running forever, so no more superhumans would be born. But, of course, the machine got broken, and then these kids suddenly find out, oh, hang on a second, how come I can run, at 10,000 miles an hour? That's unusual.
Brilliant.
Yeah, and so it started out as a 4-book series for HarperCollins. And they said, no, we only want 3 books. So I went, so we worked the third book the fourth and third books together into one story. And then when I was halfway through the second book, the publisher said to me, okay, we're looking at 4 books, we've decided. And I went, hooray! So I left the ending open of the third book. And then when I was just about finished the third book, they said, no, we're not going to do any more. And I went, what? My original editor left, and the new editor didn't have the same love or support or whatever. And ultimately, that happens a lot, I've discovered subsequently with writers, is that we have our great plans for how we want to do these things, but we are at the whims of the market and the publishers. Yeah. And ultimately, if the publisher says, we don't think this is going to sell, well, that means 2 things that the writer has to be aware of. It means that A, we don't think we want to sell this, and B, they're probably right, it won't sell. Their job is to make money come out of pockets into their pockets. I don't want to be crude about it, but they don't, as a company and as a whole, they don't care what is on the paper that they sell. The company as an entity doesn't care that the story is good or bad as long as it sells, because that company is designed to keep itself afloat, like any company. As a writer, we're very isolated, and we tend to think that we're the most important people in the business, and in the process. But ultimately, we're not. Our job is to provide if you like, the template, which is the book, the text, and the publisher's job is to sell that, and that's much harder. Yeah. It takes an awful lot more people to sell a book than it does to write it.
Yes.
I'm not saying that the writer's job is hard.
And as independent creatives, of which I count myself as one, the marketing side takes a long time, when in fact all you want to do is concentrate on the creative stuff. You've been in the industry now full time for over 20 years. How do you feel that the industry has changed over that time, since the late 90s when you made writing your full-time job?
Well, from a physical point of view, it's much simpler. It used to be that we had to print out our manuscripts and mail them to the publisher, and that's just one aspect, obviously. But that in itself was an extremely labour-intensive process, because if you're sending out a short story and you wanted to go to a magazine like Astounding or somewhere in the States, you print out your story. It's 10 pages or so. First of all, you've got to find a paper that's American letter size paper, which is not the same as A4. It's wider and shorter. It's like paper that lives on Jupiter. It's a higher gravity. And so, because some publishers wouldn't accept paper that was the wrong size. So if you were doing a novel for the States, That was a nightmare. Plus, your printer had to be able to cope with that. Then you had to physically lug the thing down to the post office and mail it, and that cost money. And even here in Dublin, I think my third or fourth of the romance novels was 500 and something pages in a manuscript format. And my publisher at the time insisted that every time I gave her a new draft, it had to be properly bound, which meant taking it down to the print shop and getting them to do the thing with the, I don't even know what you call them anymore, but you pull the thing down at the big little holes.
Binder.
The binder. You see? But that's all gone. I can't actually remember the last time I printed a manuscript. But again, it was one of those things that was, you made sure the manuscript was absolutely perfect before you printed it and sent it off, because it meant another 4 hours trying to print the thing, because if you're on a laserjet printer, it wasn't fast. And of course, it meant another tenner on paper and another 20 quid on postage, unless you could deliver it by hand, which sometimes you did, and that took half a day. That's all gone now completely. And then, of course, you used to get the manuscripts back in the post with the handwritten notes from the editor all over, so now it comes back electronically. It saves a huge amount of time. That said, of course, I've got 4 filing cabinets downstairs full of different drafts of manuscripts that one day I'm just going to have to shred them and burn them, because they're no good to anybody.
Yeah.
But
for someone who is you 21 years ago, trying to get into the industry, trying to make this their full-time job, what kind of advice would you give them?
Oh, well, you see, that's the big question. The most important thing, if you want to be a writer, is you have to write. Yeah. Talking about it is not the same as doing it. I know it sounds obvious, and it sounds almost rude to say so, but my friend Michael Scott, who gave me the first advice back at the beginning, he said you've got to apply the seat of the pants to the seat of the chair and apply the fingers to the keyboard. If you don't do it, it won't get done. No amount of wishing is going to make it happen. You have to do it, and that means making mistakes along the way. It means writing stuff that you're not comfortable with, writing romance novels when you want to write science fiction. You get the stuff out there. If we don't produce the goods, there's, they're not going to give us money for stories that we haven't written.
Never a truer word said. Michael, where can people find you online?
Well, I am on my internet, my website, which is www.michaelowencarroll.com. It's OWEN, michaelowencarroll.com. And I've got various blogs and Facebooks things. But if you start there, then I've got all the other bits and pieces that one feels is necessary, which are a great distraction from actually writing. I have to say.
Yeah. Well, I'll put all those links in the show notes as well.
Thank you very much, sir.
For now, Michael Carroll, thank you ever so much for joining me for a cuppa.
Thank you very much.